Okay, so this video is all about visualization drawing. So I'm going to be running through visualization drawings specific to the tiny house project. Now this runs on a few assumptions. The main assumption is, of course, that we've already done the research and we've developed a really good idea of the styles and the general shapes that we're looking for. So we're skipping across all of that. To expedite that, I have basically just printed out a handful of images of some tiny houses which I'm going to use as inspiration. So that's the first thing that we're going to need to have done. So make sure that whenever you're drawing, you've always got those reference images at hand. There's no point doing the research if you don't do that. So then the second thing is I've got some worksheets which are here to guide a little bit. So this is basically just the first worksheet, which is just talking about how you create using different angles. So generally your visualizations, most of them are going to be in 2-point perspective. So you're going to need to, before you just jump ahead and start drawing, have a think about what's going to be the primary feature of the exact drawing that you're doing. Did you want one that kind of angles a bit more towards the roof so you can focus on some roof details? Did you want one that's really focused on the side angles, or did you want to focus on the front? So have a think about that. That's step one. All right, so the next step in terms of this, and I hope you can see these outlines well, is to think about the layout of your page. So before you start doing anything, you've got to think about how this is going to look as a page as a whole. This particular layout, I've done 4 ideas. So each idea contains 2 drawings. So some ideas are going to be a 3D depiction. And here I was thinking about doing a floor plan. So you've got your 3D depiction, and then you can just draw a sketch of how that might correlate or carry across into a floor plan. These 2, I've done my 3D depictions, and then I'm going to do some elevations so that you can illustrate your idea using multiple different angles. In this idea, I've done 2 3D depictions, which can be useful sometimes if they're using opposing angles. So you're basically going to clump these together so you can see how my ideas, so the same idea from different angles, I've just done a slight overlap. So they're still kind of connected, and you can visually see that they're the same idea, that they're different angles of the same idea. Of course, we've still got our person here, and we've labeled our ideas as well. So that's going to come in really handy down the track with your annotations. After you've done that, we'll move on to this one here, which is so you've created these really light crates, which are the boxes, the 2-point perspective boxes that your designs are going to fit in. You've done them very lightly because they always need to be rubbed out. Now you can press a little bit harder and you can start feeding in the details. So you can see I've done this crate and I've added a roof following the perspective, making sure that I'm always going along the lines of the perspective. It doesn't need to be perfect perspective in a visualization drawing, but it does look weird if the perspective is way out of whack. So try to at least roughly get the perspective correct. So we're adding in a roof line, we've added our details, we're adding windows, and we're modifying the shape slightly. If you're feeling adventurous, do some curves or do some angles that are not cubic. They're really exciting, and they can really add a wow factor to your folio. So have a go at that. You're adding the details, and where you want to be at the end of this is that you've got these finished line drawings, and then you can just start adding things like shrubs and extra lines. And what that does is it creates context. It makes people visualize how that building might sit in its environment. So really important to do that. It also makes the page more visually pleasing too. So and it fills it up. The last stage is to group your illustrations and annotate them. So you could do little colored blobs to kind of create a bit of a shade here. They're a bit difficult to see in the camera, but I've just created these little grey blobs that go in the background of my images, and it connects the ideas even more. Moving forward from that, you've got two types of annotation. You've got your little feature or single feature annotation where you could point out a detail in the roof or point out the skylines or point out the where the kitchen goes. So they're just your single features. It's a little arrow and it just says one thing. It says kitchen, or you could drop in a design element. So use of tone here or something. So really, really short call out. And then you've got your bigger reflective or creative or critical thinking annotations. So these are normally connected with one or more of your ideas. And that's where you're talking, you could bring in your PMIs, so your plus minus interesting. You could just talk reflectively about how this design might carry across into future designs, or what you think about it, what you like, what you don't like. So you've got these big blobs which talk about those broader and more detailed, more expansive ideas. And then you've got these little call outs which basically just point out individual details. All right, so let's get started. Okie dokie. So we're starting with our visualization. Now, I would recommend to use this. You can print this out at at A3, sorry, and you can put it behind your paper if you want. So if you're not really confident with doing the 3D illustrations off the back, or using your 2-point perspective intuitively, you can just print this out A3 and you can basically just trace to get your crates and move the paper along, create another box and go from there. In this instance, I'm just going to be drawing them freehand. And that's a good practice to get into as well, or something at least to practice, because it's really going to help develop your skills with 2-point perspective, which is going to come in very handy. So I'll start with going over this corner. So as you can see, I'm just really lightly penciling out the general shape. So we've got this one, and I might stick that towards I might just do a front image only. So we've got that one, and then we'll do another one which is maybe a little bit more focused on the roof. So you can see I'm being reasonably good with my 2-point perspective, but it's not to the point that I'm getting out a ruler and drawing out the dots. So as long as it looks passable, no one's going to be looking at your generation of ideas or your visualization sketches with a ruler and saying, oh, those don't perfectly converge at the vanishing point. No one does that, but if it looks really, really wonky, people are going to notice, and it really can be a bit distracting from your design. So with this one, I'm just going to roughly draw out an elevation of what that's going to look like. So that's idea 2. Then idea 3, I might do a concept looking from the ground. So what that does is it's going to put the focus on the walls, and it really kind of creates it's a dramatic kind of look. And then I might, from there, I'll do a second 2-point perspective where I'm just going to add that little guy there. That doesn't look quite right, but that's all right. We can survive. We'll do that. And then we got one over here, which I might do a real strong focus on the sides. And then, well, if there's one strong focus on the sides, how about we do another one, which is a heavy focus on the on the front. All right, so we've got these three. So we've really basically sketched them in. So now the next job, as we were thinking, is that we'll just really lightly sketch in our figure on each of them. So important to do this because it just gives us that scale. And it's important to do this before you add things like walls and windows and things, because it's so easy to just fall out of whack with your scaling. So I'm just really lightly drawing it. So in this case, the figure, see that figure already is way out of whack. So I'm going to probably adjust the design on that. So generally speaking, the figure sits a bit above halfway. So I'll adjust that one. So yeah, we just want him to sit a bit above halfway because that's about the height of a roof line. So we're drawing that in. All right, so we've done our crating. We know that we've got a really nicely laid out page. We've got a few ideas. And now all we need to do is start filling those ideas in with the line drawing. So we're going to move on to that next. Okay, so we're starting to move on to our visualizations now. So that's when we pull this one out and we start thinking about what we want to do. So I'd really like to do one which uses this kind of inset face. So I'm going to use that for one idea. I think that you can't really not do a house-shaped design, so that pitched roof. I was thinking of one that might just do some overhung verandas on each side. And then the fourth one, I'm going to just have a bit of a play with doing something a bit rounded and see if we can achieve something there. So first and foremost, for some reason I feel like starting at the bottom. I don't really know why, but I'm going to start with my rounded one. Maybe it's just a case of getting the hard one out of the way early on. So now again, you don't need to do these perfectly round things, but the main thing is you can sort of see that I'm starting the curve at about midway up and I'm trying to get it to finish about the same distance in, so we kind of get this really even curve, and then you're kind of just doing it by eye from there. So we've got that, and then we can, maybe we'll fatten out this line a little bit. And doing the front version as well, which is a bit tricky with this curve that we've got, but we'll figure it out, because then we could consider doing sort of a doorway here that's somewhat inset. So that's sort of starting to come together. It looks a bit like a toaster. You could call this the toaster concept. Why not? You can be a bit funny with your ideas. You don't need to always be super serious. Don't try to be too funny though. Obviously, you know, if you're just constantly taking the mickey out of yourself, you're not really going to be able to take your ideas as seriously. But I'm going to do this as a big window wall. So you can kind of see that the ideas are just sort of starting to flow through a little bit. Then we got this one. So this is going to sort of exemplify that inset a bit. And we've got our focus on the front door. So, because as I was saying before, you've really got to make sure that the angle you choose is there to illustrate the specific things that you can only really see by looking at it from that particular angle. So we'll do that. So that's our idea one, line drawing done. With our second one, I think the pitched one would be really good with this, because I think this really dramatic kind of upward looking pose, I think really fares well with the pitch. So we'll draw that up. And I'm just going to add an inset into there as well. So we've got something like that happening, and then we'll do the same. So this is almost sort of the focus on the roof line of the same image. So you're just redrawing that. Now don't be too precious again with your perspective. Main thing is just to make it look not obvious if there's any issues with the perspective. So as long as it's not really, really wonky, as I said, nobody's going to be getting out a ruler and checking your work. And then we've got this one. I might use this one to create that kind of inset that I really liked. So I'll draw up this. So we're sort of creating that inset now. And I might just add another window here to go like that. And this can be a flat roof. All right, and then we've got our front on version, which I think is going to fare really well for this one because we can just do that shape there, and we can draw out what the doors are going to look like on the entrance there. So we'll loosely draw that out. And then the third one, we were going to do that overhang all around. So I might just draw that like that. I'll send that to the back. So I'm just trying to create a 3D kind of cube that sits above and just creates a little mini veranda all the way around. And then of course, that could be exemplified really well with that sort of veranda there. If you're not confident doing straight lines, you can use a ruler. But the main thing I'd recommend if you really want to get these straight lines is see how far back I'm holding my pencil. Doing big swooshes. If you've got your pencil really close, you have to use your whole arm to do a straight line, and arms are not reliable. They can go back and forth and wobbly and this and that. So, but generally speaking, we've got our rough concepts. So I'm just going to feed in a little bit more detail in parts. I'm going to add a doorway here. Now with any doorways, always make sure you quickly glance over at the little person that you've drawn because yeah, a lot of students I've found end up doing doorways and and it's just so different, way smaller than it should be, and you're like, wow, people would really need to squash in to fit in that doorway. So yeah, really important you do things like that. You can sort of add some insets into the doorways just for some details. Add some little frames, go from there. So this is a pretty basic layout. This one's a bit more complex, looks a bit cooler. I like this inset, and you could really start to think about how you might be able to use some wood paneling or something to add some details there. But effectively that marks the end of the pencil line drawing. So now we're going to move on to, we're going to get the pen out and we're going to start adding some details using the pen. So we're going to outline what we've done loosely, and then we can just start adding our own little details. So you don't have to always draw everything with a pencil and then go over with a pen. You just want to make sure that the majority of it is laid out with a pencil, and then you can start adding some more details with the pen. All right, so we have two pens, a thick one and a thin one. Always start with the thin one. The thick one is for the end where you want to just really sort of bring all of your designs together. So now you want to be reasonably accurate with your pen. Might get another pen. That one's running out. That's not a good start. All right, reasonably accurate with your pen, and just going over with the pencil. With the generation of ideas, you don't really need to rub out the pencil unless it's really messy. Yeah, you can actually kind of just keep your pencil in. With the generation of ideas, it does, I wouldn't say it benefits, but there's an expectation that the ideas do look a little sort of, not sketchy, but a bit rough, because you don't want them to look totally finished because it sends out the wrong idea. And then we'll put that there. So at the moment, all I'm doing is going over the pencil lines. But here is where, so I've finished going over the pencil lines, pretty happy with that, but this is where I start adding these double lines to kind of filter in some more details of the window frames. You would never really need to do these double lines with a pencil because you kind of know roughly what they're going to look like. But I would do that. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'd add an extra double line there. And that's looking pretty good. So then we'll do the same. We're just going over it with a pencil. And by pencil, I mean pen. Going over that. So, and you can do little fix-ups. See, we're sort of looking a bit up on this, so I'm just going to inset that just the tiniest bit. All right, so that's project one, and now we can add some details perhaps to the doorway. You know, make that look a bit nicer, make it look a bit more welcoming, yada yada yada. And then we'll do our little person, and I'm just going to do him just as a line drawing. We'll just draw that guy there. He can just sit there and chill and be a scale. That's his job in life. So moving on to the next one. So again, you're just making these minor refinements with the drawing of the pen. You're adding little extra lines where you can. In this case, I've created this slight inset, which I hadn't done with the pencil. And keep going on, keep going on. Now again, if you're not 100% confident, get your ruler out and do these as ruled lines. They do sort of have a slightly nicer feel if they're a little bit wobbly, being the generation of ideas, but yeah, so don't feel as though they have to be absolutely perfect, but if you feel as though your line drawing is just going to be so out of whack that it's going to just look really wonky and kind of take away from the design, then yeah, just get your ruler out. There's no requirement to hand draw these drawings. So we'll get that out. Apologies for the noise in the background. Alright, then we've got this back one here. Now with these really long lines, most people would probably want to get a ruler out for that. That was wonky for me as well, so I think that some, like with the shorter lines, you can certainly get away with it, but with the longer lines, yeah, it's probably worth just getting a ruler out. So doing something like that. We'll move on to this one. Again, we'll just draw our little line drawing of the guy. And now we're just going to go ahead and finish this one off. Now it's not a bad idea to time yourself drawing these as well. Particularly once you're into Unit 3 and 4 and you're doing your folio and you've got heaps and heaps of pages to do and you've got a plan for all of this. It's a really good idea to know how quickly you can pump a page out because it really helps with your planning as to being able to accurately determine how many pages you'd be able to draw in a set amount of time or per week based on how much time you're allowing yourself to spend on this. So very, very good idea to know exactly what your strengths, what your speeds are, and basically your expected work process, so that you know how much time you can spend, or at least you can forecast how many pages you think you'll be able to achieve within your time frame. So doing this is starting to come together. I might fast forward this next bit because I'm just filling these in with the pen tool, so there's not much new beyond what we've already done. So I'm just going to keep working through this. I'm going to hit the fast forward button, and then I'm going to stop when I finish using this pen. All right, so I've finished doing my outlines now. That's starting to come together. It's starting to look like a pretty well finished generation of ideas page. So you've got the option, you can kind of leave the page like this, or otherwise you can go over it with a thicker liner. That's my style. That's the style that I generally lean towards. Yeah, some people don't. Some people think it's a bit too clunky to do that. So I'm going to quickly do that. And before I do so, I might just add in a few more details with the pen. So this is when you can start depicting specific textures. So such as, I wanted this wall to be timber, so I'm just going to go over and do that. So we just start feeding in some extra details here and there. Now the idea with the generation of ideas is that you don't want to feed in too many details or make your design too overcomplicated. You want to just feed in enough details to communicate pretty much roughly what the crux of what you're trying to do is. So with this one particularly, I want to have this really stark contrast between the outside walls and the inside and the inset bit. So that's why I'm drawing this as a texture, because it's something that I think is a major part of the design, or a major influence of my idea. So just doing that, feeding in a little bit more. Yeah, not sure what else I'd really do in terms of that. Maybe you could just do some cute little details like adding in your insets here, things like that. I could perhaps make this like a little timber ledge. So add in some shading there. You could also consider doing some hatching to represent definite shadows as well. That normally looks pretty cool. It just sort of makes the design pop a little bit. So I'll add in some shading here. Now again, the shading doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. It's allowed to be a bit rough. As I said, this is just the generation of ideas page, so don't be too precious about it. But it's still nice if you do show that you've spent a bit of time doing something like that though. All right, so I might, I'll just add my darker lines in now. So I also like using the thicker lines, because the contrast between the thick and the thin lines, I think, looks quite attractive and just gives that extra dimension to your drawing. So going over thicker lines here. So you can sort of see that now that just, I don't know, I think that that just pops out just that little bit more than it otherwise would have. So going through. There are pros and cons to this though, like it can look a bit cartoonish. You definitely don't want to overdo the thick lines because it's the thick lines, if you overdo it and they start appearing in too many places, it starts eating into the detail and your whole design starts looking really chunky. So from an aesthetic point of view, I would try to avoid overdoing the thick lines. It's something I've done quite a bit and learned my lesson on several times over. So hopefully I can pass that little gem of wisdom on to you. All right, so we've done that. We've got our little thicker lines. So that's starting to come up pretty good. So I'm just gonna, now this is when you just try to throw 1 or 2 minutes at just feeding in some details to just give your design that extra bit of depth. So this is just a little bit of hatching here, a little bit of hatching there. And you're just trying to sort of feed in a bit of interest. Now this is when you start putting in your shrubs. So you can put your little, now shrubs may seem a bit pointless to draw, but when you start drawing them in, you can really see your design lifts. So just adding a bit of texture on the shrubs. A few little dots here and there. This and that. Whacking a shrub here too. A couple of little dots. That's all looking pretty good. Let's whack a pretty big one in the background here. So just some scribbly dots, and you can kind of see how this is starting to just contextualize the graphic just that little bit. It's also another great scale reference as well. If you've sort of got some trees nearby, not as good as a human because trees vary in size a little bit more than humans do, generally speaking. But drawing away, and that's starting to look pretty good. So we've got basically our pen out of the way then, and we can move on to the next stage. Okay, so the next stage is we're getting these guys out, which are called Copic markers, and these are designed to just give a little bit of an extra element of interest to your design, and you can blob things together using these. So there's lots of different ways that you can benefit from Copic markers. So really good to have an experimentation with these. That said, if you overdo these, you can really destroy your designs. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and done some photocopies at the ink level. So before you start coloring in, if you've got a really nice drawing that you're happy with, please do a photocopy of it before you start coloring it in, because if you ruin it, then it can be really devastating. So make sure you do some photocopies, particularly if you're new to Copic markers. So what I'm going to do firstly is I'm just going to roughly draw out some little blobs that I want to color in with my Copic markers. So first and foremost, I'm going to draw some circles where I want to do my annotations. So I've got them, and now I'm just creating some blocks around here. All right, so I've just sort of drawn roughly where I want to colour in with Copic markers. So that's just using a pencil. And now what I'm going to do is basically you can just start colouring in with the Copics. So filling in these blocks. I'm just going to go over my little human with the Copics. Now this is really where Copics shine. That took was so quick to just fill in all of that with colour. Now again, you can be a bit rough. You don't need to do these absolutely perfectly. Again, this is just the generation of ideas, so it's allowed to look a little, I suppose the word is shabby chic. So a little bit, you know, don't throw this in the bin if your Copic marker goes into your drawing a little bit or over any lines. It's not a colouring in competition. But you're just sort of filling it in. And then last one, I'll do that. So you can see I'm kind of avoiding the areas that I was intending on filling with some annotations. It's reasonably important with that. If you're using a nice light Copic marker like this, you can actually just draw over the coloured in area. But yeah, generally speaking, it's better to make sure your annotations are on all white, just so they're just that little bit easier to read. Okay, so we've done that. So we've kind of filled that in a bit. This is all looking pretty good. We'll go over a few of these. And now you can just add some shadow elements using the Copics as well. So you're starting now to draw into the design. So I'm just going to add things like that. Windows, you generally want to colour in windows, and you can sort of leave a bit of a light area in the middle that kind of creates makes it sort of gives it that glazing look. So yeah, we end up with something like that, and that's starting to come together pretty well. Yeah, I'm reasonably happy with that as it stands, and I think that that's probably ready to move on to the annotation part. All right, so ready to go on to the annotation part. The only thing I just thought, just as I was finishing this off, is to perhaps think about making your shading just a little bit darker around the bottom. So the thing with Copics is you can just keep adding more and more, and it just makes it that little bit darker. Again, you're just doing this to make your designs pop off the page just that little bit more. So these are just the things that really can make the difference between a very good and a fantastic idea generation page. So you can just sort of see that this is just making it pop just that little bit. Certainly using plenty of ink. We'll probably need to refill this guy, but going back, forth, back, forth. All right, and we'll just do this final one here. All right, so there we have it. We've finished drawing this. So now it is time for the annotations. So the first thing that you're going to want to do with your annotations is give these guys at least a number. Some students like to, and I also like to give them names as well. So you might have in-cut concept, you might have veranda concept, rounded concept, and house-like concept, or something like that. But whatever you do, just make sure you give them names. So we'll call this, we'll just put that in a bubble there. We'll call that the in-cut concept. Now it's really good to, before you start your annotations, is get out your design elements and principles, methods, media, materials, and design strategies and all of that, because you want to have them next to you, because you've got to drag these into your annotations. So you need to drop those keywords: line, shape, tone, form, color, texture, everything like that. You really want to make sure that you're doing that, and also your creative and critical and reflective thinking strategies. So whether you might use a PMI or a SWOT analysis or whatever you're choosing to do, make sure you have them ready and you can just tick them off as you go. So we'll call this 2. We'll call this the veranda concept. We'll call this one the rounded concept. And then we'll call this one the house concept. All right, so now the main thing is we've got this big block, as I was showing you before. This is going to be the long and sort of more wordy description of your reflection on the design as a whole. And then you can also do things like put your little arrows there, and you could talk about double paned glass. You could talk about your overhung veranda over here. You could talk about the rounded roof line. You could talk about perhaps some colors and textures as well. So you could talk about, this is bringing in an element and a principle, so contrast, using texture. And you can just put in brackets wood and flat color. So you're just starting to pull this apart and adding some little annotations. Say heavily inset. So you can kind of see that my little human here there's slightly different scales happening. So this guy's actually quite small compared to the height of this building. So you will make little mistakes like that, but they're much less likely to be made if you've at least got the human there, because the human at least kind of, you can glance across and it'll keep you in check occasionally. So you could just call these plain windows. You can also ask yourself questions in the annotation. Add interest. That's just sort of saying that, is there a possibility you could make them more interesting? So almost how a teacher might mark your work, just sort of give you these little questions to ask. Call this your bench seat. So you're just pulling your design apart a little bit just by calling out different things. Now I'll talk about the in-cut concept as an annotation, and then I might just fast forward through the annotations for the remainder so that we can get to this finished page. So colors. So basically this annotation, just in and of itself, you're just saying what you were trying to do and why you were trying to do it. That says a lot to the person assessing or to the person looking at it as to what's being achieved here, just to clear up and clarify those things. So you can sort of see how I was running out of space a little bit there. There's not actually that much you can say with your annotations before you run out of space, so just be aware of that. But basically I was just trying to wrap it up by saying that you could, I intend on developing this design further or considering this design for development. This design over here, in my annotations, I'd probably say, look, it's a little bit too plain. I think I want to try to achieve something more, and the overhanging gutters kind of impede a little bit and are a bit of a waste of space. So I would talk about this, probably what I dislike about it, and then I would opt to not continue with this design in later stages. Whereas this one, I think it really has some potential there. So this is the discussion that you're going to have. Even if it's as light as this will undergo further development, I will not continue with this design because of XXX. So they're the sort of discussions that you can have with your annotations. So I'm going to fast forward through the remainder of the annotations, and then we're going to stop with this finished page. All right, so I've gone through and I've completed my annotations. The page is looking pretty good as a whole. You would generally kind of step back from this and say, oh, look, there's a bit of white space over here, and it kind of looks a bit crowded over there. So there's a few little like reflections that you could make to the aesthetic as a whole. So you might think about what perhaps could go over here to sort of make the space really filled. They're really, really minor changes though, so you wouldn't stress too much about that. Generally speaking, with my annotations, I've called out a lot of the single features. I've talked about how it's a really, really common style. And the issue with it being a common style is that it's not necessarily unique. So as we develop this concept, we would want to think about ways that we can make this different to what's already out there, because at the moment it's simply not. With this one, I was talking about how this was similar to the old streamlined caravans of the 50s that were kind of rounded at the front. And I think that that's a really cool form to bring in. So I think this has got potential to develop as well. That represents our idea generation page. You've got a lot of critical, creative and reflective thinking going in there. You've annotated them quite well. Every idea looks like you've really tried hard to pull the essence and illustrate the essence of that idea. This would represent a very strong idea generation page.